Coming up today on this Blue Friday edition of Seahawks Forever, powered by BetUS, we're going to take a closer look at the Seahawks and Titans joint practices that were held this week and look ahead to the preseason game tomorrow in Nashville. Easton Freeze covers the Titans and hosts the Hot Read Pod. He was on the field Thursday. He's going to tell us from his perspective what he saw, heard, and felt from the Seahawks and Titans, and from an outside looking in, some of the things he really loves about this Seahawks roster and one big position group that continues to concern him. Easton Freeze joins me next, talking Titans and Seahawks.
Welcome to the Seahawks Forever podcast. In-depth analysis on everything Seahawks. And now, here's your host, Dan Viens.
Shout out to those of you who have bought me a coffee or a beer on buymeacoffee.com this week. Thanks to Brett. Thanks to Dave, as always, a regular contributor to the show. Thanks to Bergie and my friend Bryce Coots of the Hawks on Rundown podcast. Thank you, my friend. Ed Lyman, also, thank you for contributing. All the different ways that you can contribute and support the show will be listed down below. In the meantime, be sure to hit that thumbs up on this video, subscribe to the YouTube channel, and hit that bell so you get notification of future episodes. This episode is brought to you by the folks at BetUS. If you sign up now at the link down below, they'll give you a 125% sign-up bonus on your first 3 deposits up to $2,000. Again, click that link below and check out BetUS. So this was a great conversation. If you've been watching the channel for any length of time, you know that I like to have opposing viewpoints on the show, especially when we're previewing an opponent coming up. We did this in the offseason, bringing on content creators from the other 3 NFC West teams. I always love the outlook because, look, these guys are passionate about football, and they're not all just homers. They're not all just biased and looking at, their team through rose-colored glasses and holding themselves above everybody else. Sometimes the best opinions that you get are from those from the other sideline because they have no emotional investment in the team. And so I'm glad I was able to hook up today with Easton. I think you're really going to enjoy this conversation. He has some really well-informed things to say about the Seahawks. So let's get into that. And this is Easton Freeze. Again, he hosts the Hot Read Pod and covers the Titans. Here's our conversation we had earlier today. So, Easton, you were there covering the Titans, but you only were able to attend one of the practices. But you got to go to Thursday instead of Wednesday, so day 2, which we call the fun practice. A lot of stuff happening that day. What did you enjoy about it?
Yeah, it was a fun day. And like you said, I'm on a leave right now, so taking training camp a little bit lighter, but I was there on Thursday. It was a lot of smack talk. It was a lot of action. They actually took it a little bit easier in terms of how long they practiced because they went so long on day 1 of the joint practices. Guys were cramping up. The heat was starting to impact guys, and I think both head coaches weren't crazy about the idea of pushing them super hard. Again, it was like a 2.5 hour practice in the middle of the day in Nashville in August, which is on paper a bad idea. So doing that 2 days in a row is really tough on guys. They didn't have any issues with energy, I felt like, on Thursday, though. I thought both teams acquitted themselves well. Both offenses on day 1 really struggled. I think both defenses shined to start the joint practices. And then on day 2, when I was there, I thought they both bounced back in a pretty good way. In particular, the Seahawks. I thought the Seahawks offense looked really good, in particular the passing game. Now, there's some important context, I think, there because the Titans were without their top 2 outside cornerbacks for these practices. Cheeto Awuzie has been injured for a couple of weeks now, and L'Jarius Sneed is a veteran load management situation with his knee. So without those guys out there, you expect guys like DK Metcalf and JSN and Jake Bobo even to eat on the outside. And not to denigrate what they did, like they're good receivers, and they did what you're supposed to do against inferior talent. They consistently won. And they looked really, really good. I think Jake Bobo is, as an outsider, just looking at the Seahawks from a national perspective, last year, I kind of fell in love with him like most people in the national media did when he started to come on as that late round pick that tested really poorly, but tape watchers during the draft season were still in love with what he put on tape and his potential in game. And he's just one of those guys that the game speed is kind of different. he's a baller, man. It was a lot of fun getting to watch him play, getting to watch him work out there. I think the Seahawks might have the most talented wide receiver 4 in the entire league. Like, it's pretty outrageous to have somebody as talented as Jake Bobo as your first backup receiver. We didn't get to see any out of Tyler Lockett. I'm sure you know better than I don't know if it was just a veteran situation because he was out there dressed, he just wasn't playing.
Right. Yeah. I think it's a little bit of load management, but
Right.
Mike McDonald's been pretty coy about it too. And so, he did say he'll be out there. He's fine. He's good to go. But sort of implied that he's not 100%. So I do think Tyler's been a lot more conscious himself on a personal level the last couple of years about taking care of his body with some of the business decisions.
Oh, he's the king of business decisions. The compilations of him sliding and avoiding tackles is some of my favorite stuff.
Yeah.
I mean,
and for the first time last year, some fans aren't in love with that, right?
Really?
I mean, it's going to have some negative connotation to some segment of the fan base. But, at the end of the day, it's Tyler. If it was anybody else, maybe it would be a bigger issue. But I think they're wise to do it. And they got plenty of young receivers, as you said, that they can give those reps to. So,
right.
What did we see? We have to talk about our old friends, Quandre Diggs and Jamal Adams. And to me, from the outside looking in, and this gave us a good opportunity to watch, not only these workouts, but some of the interviews that were done afterwards. Quandre kind of seems like he's ingrained himself, which comes as no surprise to us, as a major part of this defense, if not this whole team. I mean, he carries himself like a leader. He's front and center, and it sure looks like he's in line to play, significant reps. Jamal, on the other hand, seems like they're holding him out of practice quite often. He's listed on the depth chart behind Amani Hooker, right, at strong safety at the moment. What are the expectations there, you think, generally, for what kind of contribution Jamal Adams is going to be able to give you?
Yeah, it was interesting because these guys have been on the team for Jamal Adams has been here for a couple of weeks now. Quandre joined up last week, but this joint practice, the pair of joint practice sessions, was really the first time we got to see both of them out there playing. Jamal joined the team, and they were kind of quiet about when he would actually be available for practice. He was available for the first time during these joints, and then with Quandre last week, his first week here was just kind of getting him back up to speed. And so this was the first time we saw significant snaps from him. When Jamal came in first, he was listed as the safety 2, a starter alongside Amani Hooker. And then when Quandre came in, he got bumped down the depth chart, like you said, to that strong safety 2 position. With Quandre, you mentioned him ingraining himself as a leader in the defense. I think Seahawks fans will understand he is a natural leader type. And there was, not to say a void in leadership in the secondary, but there certainly was an opportunity when he came in because of the fact there's no more Kevin Byard here in Tennessee. The real leader of this defense is Jeffrey Simmons, but he's up front. So on that back end, you look to guys like, L'Jarius Sneed and Cheeto Awuzie and Amani Hooker are the 3 that really come to mind for me that are true veteran leadership types. A lot of young and unproven guys at the rest of the spots on that starting roster. And with Amani Hooker, it's not a slight to him, but he's just not, I think, the vocal natural leader type that a Quandre Diggs is. So when Quandre came in, it was pretty quick that we saw him start to become that vocal leader. And I think him getting to kind of lead that secondary through these joint practices against a team he's very familiar with, all of his old buddies, was an easy way for him to maybe jumpstart that relationship he has with guys. We talked to him, both Nashville media and all the traveling Seattle media, after yesterday's practice, and he was talking to us about all the smack talk. I tell you what, him and Jamal Adams I didn't hear them close their mouths the entirety of the day that I was there. They were just going and going and going, constantly focused. I think they were more focused on the Seattle sideline than they were the actual play on the field. Made it very entertaining for us. A lot of friendly jawing back and forth. You had, the Devon Witherspoon interception at the end of yesterday's practice where he immediately looks for Jamal Adams, runs, tries to hand him the ball. Jamal wants nothing to do with it. That was entertaining for sure. But I think both guys are getting up to speed in terms of their impact on the team. I'd say Quandre is going to have a more immediate impact just because he, in my opinion, is the better traditional safety right now in his career. He's slated to be getting those starter reps. I think Jamal is going to be used more in that toolsy, gadgety way, or at least that's the idea on paper. Now, Seahawks fans may very well be rolling their eyes thinking about the struggles that Seattle had with him, the years that they had him, the injuries, the inconsistent level of play.
Yeah.
We'll see. We'll see what he actually can be. We know, I mean, Seattle knows that there was a time in his career where he was worthy of a first round pick and change. And there was a time in his career after that in which he made you want to pull your hair out. So we'll see which version of Jamal we get.
Yeah. Yeah. From being the richest safety contract of all time to veteran minimum essentially in 2 years is quite the fall. Either of those guys going to get any reps tomorrow night at all? I know Mike McDonald came out and said because of the work that all the starters got in these, more intense padded practices, that none of the starters for the Seahawks are going to be expected to play tomorrow. Is that the approach Brian Callahan's going to take as well?
Yeah, so the Titans coaching staff in game one, I don't know if the Seahawks did this, gave the starters all about 2 series, 12, 14 snaps, got their feet wet. And then the plan, according to them, for this week is similarly not going to see much, if any, of the starters. So I think even some of the veteran backup guys like a Jamal Adams, I'd be floored if we saw any Jamal Adams out there tomorrow. Both he and Quandre were amongst the sweatsuit guys in game one, not even dressed out. So I don't expect to see those guys. I do expect to see a lot of the backups. And since both teams are going to go 2s on 2s, I'd imagine, at least to start, it'll probably be pretty evenly matched. And I think if you're a diehard fan of either team or a diehard fan of the draft, and so you know a lot of these guys regardless of the team,
right,
it's the kind of game that you're very sick in the head to be excited about, and you're looking forward to seeing these no-name guys that you are hoping to see flash a little bit.
Yeah, I resemble that remark.
Right.
The QB situation is interesting because for the last couple of years, there's been also, ever since Russell Wilson was traded here, there's been yearly discussion and even expectation in some parts that the Seahawks would look really hard at the quarterback position. They have done their due diligence last year, especially given that they've had opportunities at the top of the draft. And so there was a lot of interest in Will Levis when it was his year to come out. There was a lot of thought that John Schneider would be drawn to a guy like that he exhibited a lot of the qualities that Schneider likes. Similarly, the year that Malik Willis came out, there were, in fact, for a while there was some momentum leading up to the draft where he was a mock draft favorite to go to the Seahawks at 9.
Yeah, first rounder. Yeah.
When the Seahawks ultimately ended up taking Charles Cross and Willis dropped to the third
round, 91st pick, something like that.
Yeah, sounds like we're not going to see any Levis tomorrow. It's going to be the Malik Willis show. He had his struggles when given an opportunity to start, but what have you seen from him this camp? What can Seahawk fans expect to see from him tomorrow?
Yeah, Brian Callahan confirmed to us yesterday that he will be starting this game. He's battling with Mason Rudolph, who the Titans went out and signed in free agency to be the rationale at the time in the spring was this is going to be our starter. We, would like to see more from Malik Willis, but he's entering year 3. It's been a lot of struggles so far in his career. He's a guy that came from a program in college where very gimmicky, very collegiate offense, really, really different, hard transition to the NFL. And so the idea that he's a project was nothing new when he was drafted, but there hasn't been enough progress to warrant continuing to put all your eggs in that basket. That being said, this year has been really fascinating. This offseason has been really fascinating for him. Going from the Vrabel regime, which was kind of caveman, cave wall paintings, hitting sticks and stones together in terms of quarterback development, to a very fresh, shiny, new, modern offensive approach. Brian Callahan bringing in guys around him with his coaching staff that can surround Malik Willis. And I've talked to some people behind the scenes, including his personal quarterback coach. The general theme I'm hearing is, well, now that Malik finally has people around him who understand the quarterback position, who understand how to develop the quarterback position, who understand how to make a quarterback's life easier, who understand how to tailor an offense to a quarterback's strengths and weaknesses and not just try to plug a square peg into a round hole, he's starting to improve. And this is the first offseason from him where I've seen, and folks around me who I talked to have seen, genuine improvement both year over year and kind of like week to week, practice to practice. That's a good thing. Now, is it enough of a good thing to unseat Mason Rudolph as the backup, the guy they went out and handpicked, they paid a somewhat significant amount of money to? I don't know. Is it enough to convince the team to keep him on the 53-man roster and keep 3 quarterbacks? I'm skeptical, but maybe. He's put together 3 or 4 of his best practices ever in the last 2 weeks. He's going to have to really prove himself in these next 2 preseason games, and getting to start with the 2s instead of playing with the 3s like he's done most of training camp tomorrow, getting to be out there with the 2s. I'm assuming they'll put the 2s with him. That's going to be a big opportunity for him to throw to some better talent, to be protected by some better guys up front. And so it's exciting. I think that he still has a lot of raw acumen that is worthy of giving a shot. He's got a really big arm. He's an athletic player with his legs. It's just a lot of the processing, a lot of the accuracy, those things that need to continue to improve, but we'll see what he can do tomorrow.
Now, given the opportunities that some of these guys will have tomorrow to make their last case for the roster or to just, get extended reps, guys that are solidified as backups on the roster, who are a couple other players that Seahawk fans might see flash tomorrow on either side of the ball?
Interesting. From a Titans perspective, my head goes to skill position players.
Sure.
I would say keep an eye on Jaquan Jackson, the Titans' 6th round rookie out of Tulane, a wide receiver who many of us who cover the draft really in depth, like it becomes our lives for 3 months of the whole rigmarole, going to the Senior Bowl, going to the Combine. Guys like me were kind of scratching our heads at that pick because there were some other bigger name receivers available at that position. We hadn't really done any scouting of Jaquan Jackson, small returner type. Like what's the deal with this guy? And he's made us all look really foolish through practice so far. I did a show yesterday talking about how I think the Titans wide receiver rat race at the bottom of the depth chart is all but finished. I think that he has secured himself a spot on the roster. I think that he has secured himself the job as the punt returner, most likely. And he's going to get to go out there, I'm assuming, and play with the twos with Malik Willis to start the game. When he gets the ball in his hands in space, he's a really fun player to watch. He is really shifty. He's really fast. He's just an electric little guy to watch operate out there. And I think that if he continues to track the way that he has so far in practice and in preseason game 1, he's liable to make a handful of impressive plays. One guy who I don't think is going to make the roster, but I think is an exciting player to watch and is one of those preseason types that is liable to do some fun things, is Bryce Oliver, a Titans receiver who's a UDFA. He's been making some plays, and he has a connection with Malik Willis, it seems, and Mason Rudolph. So whoever he ends up playing with, he's liable to do some fun things. Who else? Julius Chestnut is the Titans running back 3 or 4, depending on who you talk to. He's kind of a man of August in the sense that it feels like every preseason he breaks off some impressive runs and is a fringe guy to make or not make the roster. On the defensive side of the ball, my mind goes to somebody like Gabe Judy-Lawley or Jarvis Brownlee Jr., 2 rookie cornerbacks, one drafted, one a UDFA, who have both had some impressive moments in camp so far. So whichever receivers the Seahawks tried out there, I think you'll see a lot of those 2 guys covering them. They have a lot of upside. Jalen Harrell on the edge, rookie
Michigan guy.
Rounder. Yeah, Michigan guy, rookie 7th rounder for the Titans. He's kind of worked his way up to be the edge 4, to be slotted to make this roster. He's somebody Titans fans are going to be watching closely to see whether or not he flashes in these preseason games in this live action. So those are the first couple names that come to mind.
If we were previewing a regular season game here, of course, we would be talking about life after Derrick Henry, but I don't imagine we'll see any of Tony Pollard or Tyjae Spears tomorrow.
No, absolutely not.
Another continuing storyline this preseason is the at times dominant performance of rookie first-round draft pick Byron Murphy, defensive tackle out of Texas. Here's a prop bet idea for you. You like Murphy to potentially win Defensive Player of the Year? BetUS has it at plus 1,000. If you want to sign up for your BetUS account today, you can do so at the link below and get a 125% sign-up bonus on your first 3 deposits up to $2,000. Let me ask you this, because some things are happening this morning. On a local podcast yesterday, Mike Garafolo from the NFL Network indicated that Geno Smith's people had approached the Seahawks about potentially doing a contract extension when he has 2 years left on his deal. And it just kind of seemed like a sort of a nothing sidebar kind of story. It's certainly a storyline that we thought we would be dealing with next year, especially if he's as good a fit in this Ryan Grubb offense this year and has a solid season like many expect. But then this morning now we're getting the Geno Smith Instagram drama, the cryptic Drake song lyrics about I'm gone. I hope you miss me when I'm gone.
Uh-huh.
So I just want to ask you this. You watched him Thursday. You said it was a good day for the Seahawks offense. 33 years old, going through everything he's gone through in his career, being counted out, and then really a renaissance the last couple of years, comeback player of the year 2 years ago. is when you're watching him practice in pads against the Titans, trying to be as objective as possible with all the context that I just mentioned, do you see a guy that's worthy of an early extension like that you think it would be smart for the Seahawks to make sure that they secure a longer term than they have now? Or do you think maybe he's jumping the gun a little bit?
I love that you asked me about this because I wasn't sure whether you would or not. I feel like I can offer even a little more insight into this than just the guy that I saw at practice. The short answer is I think, yes, he is worthy of that as long as it's not a market resetting contract. The terms are certainly a big part of that. If he is wanting a reasonable quarterback, 6 to 10, 8 to 12 type money, $45 to $50 million a year, relatively short term because of his age, I think that is the kind of guy I see out there. He's somebody that I fell back in love with, like a lot of the online tape grinder types 2 years ago when he won Comeback Player of the Year, because of that renaissance, because of how it kind of came out of nowhere. And then you dive into the tape and you see a guy that has a really live arm. I think he's an above average processor. He's above average with his accuracy. He can push the ball to most parts of the field. I think he's a good quarterback, and getting to see him live on Thursday with my preconceived notion of, I like this guy, I think he's underrated, I still was impressed with how lively his arm looked in person, with his processing, with his ability to navigate the pocket, his awareness. He still looks spry to me. And I think the Seahawks are a really interesting team to get the perspective of a Titans guy on, because I see so many parallels to what the Titans did with Ryan Tannehill just a couple of years ago, when the Seahawks kind of revived Geno Smith's career, gave him a contract. It felt a lot like they were just like 2 years behind the Titans in terms of timeline, because Ryan Tannehill came in, revived his career, also won Comeback Player of the Year, had a couple of seasons of renaissance in Tennessee, the way that Geno Smith is actively doing. Now, here are the differences. One, Geno Smith is younger. So like Ryan Tannehill at 36 right now, I think that he is both an older and a worse quarterback than Geno Smith is. So if it was Ryan Tannehill, I would tell you no. With Geno Smith, I think that because he is younger, and because I do think he is a less limited player than Tannehill is, although I see those parallels, and a lot of people that criticize the Ryan Tannehill contract pointed to, well, you're paying a lot of money for a guy that is going to be good enough to win a lot of games, but is he a guy that's going to win you a Super Bowl? You can't really justify paying top dollar for a guy unless you believe he can win you a Super Bowl. I think Geno I would put him just barely in that, like at the very bottom of that demarcation line of guys I think you can absolutely win a Super Bowl with.
Interesting that you bring up Ryan Tannehill, because he's a guy too many years ago who a lot of people thought the Seahawks were going to draft in his draft. Really? I think that's an interesting parallel. Let me ask you this then, before I let you go. On that same note, Seahawks went out and acquired Sam Howell this offseason for a pick swap, chance to get a younger quarterback with starting experience, very, very cheap, with 2 years of control left on his deal. It's been mixed results in training camp. He looked good week 1 against the Chargers. On Thursday, what did the gap look like to you between Geno and Sam?
The short answer to that question is large. I think you could, everybody could bring their grandmother to practice day and say, hey, grandma, who's the better quarterback? And within 5 minutes, she's very easily identifying it's the guy it's Geno Smith. It's that guy. To just kind of lay my priors out there, I was a Sam Howell guy coming out in that really abysmal quarterback draft a couple of years ago. I thought that he had a lot of raw traits that could be honed in with the right situation. And then he went to the exact opposite of the right situation, kind of broke his brain a little bit with the protection in Washington. Now he was slinging it out there. And like I think there was at one point in that season where he was like on pace to lead the league in touchdowns and in sacks. He's continuing to not get much protection, again, just from the one day of practice I've seen, but he was not protected well at all out there. The twos were really struggling against the Titans defensive line, the Titans backup defensive line, which I should note is not a fantastic group by any means. So I feel like his brain is kind of breaking out there. And if he can't get into a better situation where he can start to develop, he reads like a guy that is just barely treading water and not actually progressing forward. Now, I'm not saying it's completely not his fault. I think that he is a flawed guy that I'd like to see more from, even given circumstances, but I have a hard time really blaming him so far, because I don't think, whether it's with Washington or with the backups in Seattle so far in his career, he's been given much of an opportunity to succeed.
You might have just triggered a little PTSD there among Seahawks fans talking about offensive line struggles. It's been a focal point of this roster for years. How did the Seahawks first unit look against a very, very good defensive front for the Titans when they got a chance to match up?
Yeah, I was going to volunteer this information if you didn't ask me, because this is like the number one takeaway I had from the Seahawks from this practice was, I think, easily the most concerning element of this team is the offensive line, which isn't the place you want to be. And that's not to say that they were a complete dumpster fire. I think that statement is in part complimentary of, I think you got a good quarterback situation. Love your skill position players. I think the defense is in good hands with Mike McDonald and his staff. I'm not really worried about anything but that offensive line right now. Well, maybe middle linebacker, but that's a conversation for another day. The offensive line, it in the interior in particular was really struggling against the Titans starters. Now, in fairness, where the Titans don't have much depth at all, their backup defensive line is not great. Their starters on the inside, you got Jeffrey Simmons and rookie Tavondre Sweat.
Right.
And those two are, in the eyes of Titans fans and media, I think that they are about to become one of the nastiest tandems in the NFL when they're both out there on the field. That's a handful. On the edge, you should win against the Titans on the edge right now. It is a really thin group. It's a lot of guys that are questionable as to whether or not they're really true starters. I mean, the Titans' only true edge right now is Harold Landry, and he is a good player, don't get me wrong, but you've got Arden Key on the other side who's going to be suspended, so he's getting not full starter reps at times. And then behind those two guys, it is Rashad Weaver and Jalen Harrell, and then a bunch of guys you absolutely have never heard of. And they were still struggling. Both tackles were struggling, not as much as the interior, but on the whole, I thought the Titans defensive line, which I have decent questions about, won for the most part against, I mean, if you had just listened to Jamal Adams smack talk the entire day, most of what he was saying was, hey, our defensive line is murdering you. What are you guys doing? Like, that was the gist of most of his smack talk. And he was right about that. Yeah.
Maybe I should have started on that so we could have ended on a more positive note, but it's the reality. We got to deal with it at some point. Right.
Right.
And here in Seattle, there is a lot of anticipation of Connor Williams taking over at the pivot and potentially getting Abe Lucas back at some point. So still a fluid situation there.
Can I ask you a question about that, by the way? Because I was talking to, I don't know if you're familiar with Danny Kelly, but he's a friend of mine. He used to cover the Seahawks out there, and now he does national and Ringer stuff. But I was talking to him about this joint practice, and we were talking about both teams' new head coaches, new systems on both sides of the ball. And I was talking to him about how, man, this offensive line worries me. Another interesting parallel is, the Titans bringing in Brian Callahan. We're expecting that offense to look sort of Bengals-ish in the sense that it's going to be a lot of quick game, a lot of taking the underneath what's given to you, a lot of designed screens. Like, it's going to be stuff that not necessarily is designed to work around a bad offensive line, but absolutely can. And, you saw the Bengals get their Super Bowl run when they were sustaining 9 sacks in playoff games on the road against the Titans and still winning those games because that offense was conducive to success. I was telling him, I kind of feel like the Seahawks need to have a scheme that looks something like that this year in the case that this offensive line is a big problem. What have you heard about what this offense is going to look like? Grubbs, right? Is it
right? Ryan Grubb, and what we hear over and over again, and we see it on tape, especially at his time at University of Washington. It looked different at Fresno State when he had Jake Haener, different player. Mm-hmm. He likes to take his shots, and he likes to work. He likes to work deep shots, and especially when paired with a quarterback like Geno Smith. So he's going to want to find those and create those opportunities. But what we saw against the Chargers last week, given the uncertainty of the offensive line, and they're still moving guys around, they still haven't even settled on a 5, even if you insert Williams in there. Case in point, Thursday, it was Christian Haynes' first shot to really get run with the ones at right guard, their 3rd round pick this year, as that competition seems to have heated up a little bit. George Fant, they've been given a lot of rest reps too as a veteran that they're going to count on at right tackle if Abe Lucas can't go. So there's still some things that haven't been settled there. But against the Chargers, it sure, with Sam Howell at the controls, it sure looked like getting the ball out quick was an emphasis. Because they did it consistently throughout the game. Now, that's a concept that we have heard about for years. Shane Waldron used to talk about getting the ball out quick all the time. We just never saw it. We're hopeful here that Ryan Grubb, especially early in the season, until they solidify that front, will be much, much quicker to go to that if need be, especially early in the season. So I do think we're going to see a lot of that. And I think the way he uses motion and bunch sets and things like that, I think it's really conducive to that. And so we'll see. Yeah, it's going to be a problem here until it isn't. Right. That offensive line. But
that's good to hear. I think that's going to be key, operating on offense in that way.
The optimism comes from the fact that, by all accounts, most people who have observed practices throughout OTAs and even into training camp feel that Charles Cross is ready to maybe take a step forward after having what was considered a disappointing second year.
Right.
That Connor Williams is going to be the best center potentially. Seahawks have started 10 different centers on 10 different opening days over the last 10 years. That maybe, not kidding, since Mask.
That's not good for your line or your quarterback. It turns out those relationships are important for the center. Yeah.
And, Williams on a 1-year deal, but the hope is it'll be a fit and it can extend beyond that. Maybe they've solved that situation. Maybe they've, found a future franchise or at least long-term starter at one of the guard spots in Christian Haynes. So they seem to be checking boxes one by one. The real question continues to be, because there's been a lot of mystery around it, we don't know Abe Lucas's status. We had heard he might be practicing by now. He's running full speed and working without a knee brace, but yet no one sees him in pads. There's no timeline given. But they sort of continue to hem and haw about him potentially being available week 1, which seems like a stretch. So until that question is answered, we really won't know, because then we're relying on a 32-year-old journeyman tackle in George Fant to hold that down. So
the reasons for hope are there, it sounds like, on paper. You're just kind of having to parlay a lot of things working.
Absolutely, because even last year when they were having to start Jason Peters at times at the age of 41, when it was evident,
he was surprisingly good for being a 40-year-old.
He was, and he had to play some guard, but then he had to kick out the tackle when Lucas went on the IR again a second time for good. That there were times that the offense was still able to function because of the weapons, because of what Geno Smith had at his disposal. And at times when it seemed like Waldron had a good plan. So I've always been a believer that you can work around that if you do it the right way. The concepts that you mentioned, there's so much hype and buzz around Ryan Grubb here. Not as much as there is with Mike McDonald, obviously, but the pair and all the excitement about the Seahawks potentially being able to play some effective defense again.
Right.
There's just as much excitement about Ryan Grubb, especially with the local ties here, because people have seen it up close. They saw what he did with Michael Penix and the Huskies, and they're hopeful that he can at least come close to matching that kind of success with this all.
Good stuff.
Yeah. Well, good stuff from you. That's Easton Freeze of the Hot Read Pod, covers the Titans, at Easton Freeze on Twitter. Really appreciate the time, man. Thanks.
This was a lot of fun. I appreciate it.
All right. And if the Seahawks and Titans end up meeting in the Super Bowl this year, we can get back together and do this.
Let's do it again. Absolutely.
All right. Until then, we'll see you, my friend. Well, we will have to keep an eye on the Geno Smith storyline. As I said, talking to Easton, I didn't think when Mike Garofalo said what he did on the Daily Puck Drop show with Jason Puckett yesterday that it would become a big deal, but now it is. At least seemingly Geno has made it that way. So we'll keep an eye on it. Geno's a guy that loves to play with a chip on his shoulder, so I think we can view this as a good thing. If he's mad and he wants to prove to the world that he's worthy of an extension and more money, then let him play that way, right? I know I had promised earlier in the week that I would do a new 53-man roster prediction. I did set up that spreadsheet and was prepared to show it to you today, but I think being just 24 hours away from the second preseason game, where we know we're going to see a lot of the middle and the back end of that roster, I'm going to give it a couple more days. Watch the performance tomorrow in Tennessee, some of those battles for potentially a 6 wide receiver spot, the third down or the third running back spot, some of those offensive line battles at the bottom of that roster. The Seahawks are going to have some tough decisions to make with some rookies there. So let's get that in the books, and then I will do a full, true 53-man roster prediction, not a projection. I will make a prediction next week. And then tomorrow, 4 o'clock Pacific time, Titans and Seahawks. I will do a live reaction show immediately upon resumption of that game. Give you my thoughts, get your comments, questions. You can watch it live and be involved in the show as well. Follow me on Twitter, as always, at Seahawks Forever. All the different ways to promote the show and support it are down below. And again, thanks to the folks at BetUS for sponsoring this program. Until next time, forever and always, go Hawks. Thanks for watching.